Hi everyone. I've added a couple of new options to the spec navigation. Well, actually, currently we don't have any spec navigation, at least not any sort of fast way of doing it besides going into the settings screen. So what I've added is a couple of hotkeys that allows you to actually cycle specifications from one to the next, and then you can cycle forward and then you can cycle back. So I'll show you quickly what I've added. Essentially, if you go into the local hotkeys, there's a couple of new options here, next spec and previous spec, and you can set those to whatever keys you want. By default, I've set it to alt right and alt left. Um, and what that allows you to do is if you have multiple specs in the forms designer, you can actually when the DOM has focus, you can use those hotkeys to cycle from one spec to the next. So it allows quite a few sort of new additions to the DOM, and so you can decide how you want to use it. But just myself playing around, I found quite a few nice little things that you can use it for. So I'll give you a couple of examples. One is you can actually set up, you could call it paging. So if you were looking at this DOM, for instance, and you've got all of these columns set up, and there's always the issue of cramming too much stuff into one DOM, like if you want extra columns or whatnot. So what you can do is you could set up two specs. You could set up a second spec with, um, you know, perhaps some data that you don't look at as frequently, and then, you could keep, say, for instance, this spec being the one that you use most actively while you're trading. So potentially what you can do is you can go and, we'll set up, so we've got 9G order book, and let's just make a copy there. We'll call it 9G order book 2. So what we could do is I'm just going to set the live spec to be 9G order book 2 so we can see the changes. Right, and now if we've got a 9G order book 2, what I'm going to do is just change the look of this. So I'm going to remove the QP column, remove the orders. I'm going to remove the bids, remove the asks, and then the volume columns I'm not particularly worried about either. So what I'm going to do is just set up a couple of new columns here and move that to the center. And I'll set this column up. I'm going to set it up as there's a new way to do this. I'll show in the next video. But so I'm going to add a volume profile on here, and I'm going to turn on the histogram, and I'm going to make it a 10-minute profile, and I'm going to make it bid only. So I'm going to set it up like a delta, and I'll just make it blue to differentiate. Now I'm going to do the same for the second column, profile. I'm not going to bother. I don't want this to go on for too long, so I'm not going to bother with naming the stuff and whatnot. I'm just going to shoot straight to sort of the main thing that I'm trying to show. So if we do volume at ask, and we do 10 minutes, we turn on the histogram, set that to red, and then just change the alignment, right? So, I mean, this is a fairly crude example, but really I just want to get the point across about how the spec cycling can be leveraged. So, right, so we've got a different looking display there now, right? Not the prettiest, but it's good enough to show the example. So what you can do now is we've got these two specs set up in order, so 9G order book and 9G order book 2. Now, if you saw in the hotkeys, we could cycle simply by pressing Alt left, Alt right. So you see that I've just hit Alt left, and it's now cycled between the spec. And of course, the spec building happens so quickly that you don't see it. So essentially, what this gives you is you now have a paging option. So you can, for instance, like I was saying, if this is the most active view that you use for the majority of the day, but there is some other information that you use less so, but you still want to look at it, you can potentially have that set up in the background, and then you can page to it and page back. And I mean, really, you can think of a lot more uses for this. This is just one particular option, and that works for multiple instruments as well. So whatever other instrument you choose, that's throughout the tabs. So let's just go to GBL, and you can page on GBL. We've just called that instrument up, so we haven't got the history on the delta yet, but that will fill itself up. Yeah, so that's one particular use case, and then another one that I'll show quickly is let's go here and just remove this. Now, another two things that I've added, as well as the hotkeys, is I've actually added buttons for cycling. So there's a next spec and a previous spec button. So what we'll do is, just to do this quick, I'm going to change these quantity buttons. So I'll change that one, and I'm going to change it from a quantity button to a previous spec button. I'm going to change the text so we can actually see that. And then I'm just going to change the color so it's a bit more obvious. Right, and that's previous spec, and then I'm going to change this button to a next spec button. Just make that an N. You know, you can put arrow images on here if you want to, if you're going to use this to make it look a bit prettier, but I'm just doing this quickly to illustrate the use. So we've got a next and a previous for cycling specs. Now what I'm going to do is just create a copy of this spec. And something very simple, in the second spec, I'm going to now hide the toolbar. So there was a requirement, one of the guys, KP, on the beta was doing this, I noticed, is that it doesn't use the instrument lookup all that frequently, you know, sets it up once and then actually prefers to not have it in view. But then what he was doing is constantly going back to the settings and then hiding and re-showing that. So in this example, what I'm going to do is just hide this toolbar in the second spec. Make sure we got the right, so make that invisible. The second spec isn't applied at the moment, so just apply it so it makes a little bit more sense. Right, so in that second spec there, I've just hidden that toolbar. You see there, I've hidden that. And of course, because I copied the first spec, it's carried my P and N buttons. So what happens now is if I go to the actual DOM and I press previous, you see it's cycled back to the previous spec. And if I hit next, you see there? So essentially, using it like that, what I've done is, I'm jumping to a spec that's got that toolbar hidden, but, you see how you can use that to sort of create, active or toolbars that kind of appear and disappear. But, that's just two potential situations that I've created at the moment to illustrate the use of that. I'm sure we'll think of more as time goes along, but yeah, hopefully those functions are going to be useful. So yeah, essentially to cover it quickly, it's two new hotkeys for the cycling the specs. Those are in the local hotkeys, and then there's two new buttons, a previous spec and next spec button. Yeah, hope you guys enjoy it. Thanks for watching. Cheers.